Welcome back to Miss List RPG. If you have ever set up a family activity, let's say a board game night, a movie evening, but then your teenager just didn't show up. And as a parent, you sat there feeling like something was missing. Today I want to talk about one of the things probably nobody ever tells you when your teenager grows up. The strange, painful feeling when you realize your teenager doesn't need you in the same way anymore, and what you can actually do about it. So when my daughter started year 7, she began pulling away. Not in a dramatic way, she just started spending more time in her room, skipping some family board game nights. And the more I tried to hold things together using the old way, the more distance became between us. So it actually took me, a while to understand what was actually happening. And once I did, everything changed. But before I start, I just want to say I am not a therapist. So if you or your teenager is facing quite a serious issue, please do reach out to a professional, okay? So parent and teenager conflict, we all know that's not a new thing. It happens basically everywhere, in every culture. But I think for families who moved in the UK, whether through the BNO routes from Hong Kong or from other countries, this particular challenge would feel much heavier than it would somewhere else. And because my own background is somewhat complex, I'm not going to say we and pretend my experience is the same as yours. But I've listened to enough people, so that's why I can say, based on what I observed, a lot of people, especially parents who came here, they were somewhat raised in a traditional way back home. Like you have to respect your elderlies, you cannot talk back. Love is just shown through sacrifice, but not through like long conversations talking about feelings. Not like that. But teenagers are growing up in UK school now, where they are actively encouraged to speak up and then to express their own opinions and feelings, which is somewhat completely different from, back home, and actually is a new way for them to see the world. Of course, neither is wrong, but when those two worlds meet inside one home, the tension, of course, is almost unavoidable. And then there's something else, because many parents, what I have observed is they move here. It tends to be the mothers who stay at home more. Of course, also due to the language barrier, or maybe unfamiliar with the system, also because without helpers, so you have to do a lot of chores, like the household responsibilities, etc. It all narrows the options quickly. And so, the family becomes everything of the parents' whole world. So when the teenager starts to withdraw and they have been the parents the whole world, those lost feelings could be enormous to the parents, far bigger than it might in a different situation. So here I want to explain why that happens, what your teenager is doing, like the closed door, the headphones, the one-word answer, actually is not rejection to you, because it's completely normal. It's just a part of their growing up. You see, between roughly the ages of 11 and 17, every young person goes through a process of figuring out who they are. Separate from the parents, their friends become more important, they want privacy. Also, they will push back on rules, not because they dislike the parents, but because in a way they're practicing being their own person. Psychologists call this individuation. And the research is clear. This is healthy. There's also a layer that is worth understanding for teenagers, especially in immigrant families. They are often living between two worlds, expected to be one person at school with a new system, while has to be someone different at home. Well, what can look like distance or attitude probably is often just a young person trying his or her best to belong in two places at once. To be honest, that is quite exhausting. And one more thing, teenagers are not always able to think like how their behavior affects other people. This is not attitude or bad character. Neuroscientist Sarah-Jayne spends years studying the teenager brains and found that the part responsible for empathy and thinking ahead, the prefrontal cortex, is still being built around adolescence. It's one of the last parts to fully develop. So when your teenager seems unaware of how they're making you feel, this is just because it's the unfinished brain doing its best. It does catch up, but it takes time. Remember, your teenagers love you. They just cannot always show it in the way you are used to. Okay, back to me about the board game evening with my daughter. At that time, my daughter was trying to pull away further and further. And to be honest, the first instant, my first feeling was, of course, not really positive. I was feeling like a little bit hurt. And then my second thought was like, I went in and I insisted. And then asking her to, come on, join us. It's a family gathering. We should show up for each other like that. Of course, later I stopped myself. And instead of asking, why won't she join us? I started asking a different question. Why does she feel she needs to stay in, but not spending time with us? I reflected honestly. Was I actually listening to what she wanted, or mostly pushing what I thought was best for her? When she said something I did not agree with, did I really hear her, or did I move quickly to correct her? I have to admit, sometimes I've been doing the second thing. Not out of bad intention because I love her so much, but I was running, some old habits, like, thinking, this is good for you, you should do it. However, what she actually wanted at that time was a totally different thing. The change I made was simple, of course not easy. So they were like, you should come out more, but with more like, tell me what is going on with you. With less trying to bring her back to how things used to be, more trying to meet her where she actually was. Psychologist Carl Rogers talked about unconditional positive regards, the idea that people often open and grow when they feel accepted for who they are, not just when they behave the way we want. And that's the time I truly understand what it actually means. Of course, it's not perfect and it takes time, but my daughter has started coming out of her room more often, and whenever she does that, our conversations are somewhat fabulous, different, more real. To the parents who are watching this, I want to speak to you directly, especially those immigrant parents who gave up a lot of things to move here in the UK. You gave up your career, your old community, your friends, your elderly parents, a version of yourself that felt familiar. And when your teenager starts needing you less, that can quietly tip into something heavier. A low mood that never quite gets named because you're too busy holding everything together for everyone else, but never for you or seldom for you. So let me say this clearly. That feeling is already a signal for you. Not that something has gone wrong, but that something needs your attention. Your teenager doesn't need less of you. They need a different version of you. One that has a life of their own. One who is growing, curious, engaged with the world. One who has things to talk about beyond just screen time, control, and grades. That only version of you, with your own friendships, with your own interest, your own sense of direction, is actually far more interesting to a teenager than a parent whose whole world revolves around them. So use the space your teenagers are starting to leave, alright? Worry less and grow more on yourselves. Learn something you have always been curious about. You can study a course, alright, build something towards a new career, make a friend who has nothing to do with the school run, call someone who you have been meaning to call for months, Remember, you have to love yourself first so that you can love the others. Take good care of yourself first. And it actually leads to a better relationship with your teenager. Yeah, because when you give your teenagers the space to grow while staying warm and available, something positive usually happens over time. The relationship comes back, but it comes back differently, better. Not the relationship where mom or dad manages everything, but the one where mom or dad is someone the teenagers actually want to talk to, because you listen, because now you have your own life. Attachment research tells us that teenagers who feel securely loved are actually more confident about moving away, because they know the relationship is strong enough to survive the distance. The drifting is not the end of the closeness, it's proof the closeness was real. Now, before I go, I want to actually try something a little bit different. So if any part of this video resonates with you, whether you're a parent going through exactly this, or whether you're someone without teenagers or kids, but simply knows what it feels like to be in the UK and not quite feel like you belong anywhere, you can leave a comment below. You know what, I'm actually thinking about starting a very small Zoom gathering, nothing formal, no agenda, but a group of real people, probably in like similar situations, or sharing some honest conversation, just like that. But to be honest, I've never done that before, so I still need to figure it out as we go. But if it goes well, we might actually turn it into like meeting in person, like a coffee, a meal, a proper catch up, a drink or two, just not a drunk drive home, then that's fine. Anyways, just if you're interested, you can pop in a comment anyways, and don't forget to give me a like, share with the friends who need this, right? Subscribe to the channel. I'll see you in the next one.